So before I start, I just want to reiterate, this is not a program, it's a how-to train for Jiu-Jitsu in the weight room, but it's not a specific program. I do have a video somewhere, I can try and find a link, where I do have a 2-day-a-week program for lifting. A lot of it's going to depend on your goals, your experience, and a host of other factors, but without further ado. So before I start talking about how to train for Jiu-Jitsu, I want to talk about what people often do wrong. And if you do Jiu-Jitsu, there's a good chance you do a lot of these things, because it is extremely common. Everyone I've met who does Jiu-Jitsu, they're doing at least like 2 or 3 of these things to their detriment. So first off, the biggest thing I see with Jiu-Jitsu practitioners is an overuse of kettlebells. Now, kettlebells aren't inherently bad by any means, but there's this thought, I don't know, Jocko probably read Pavel's book, and all of a sudden everyone was using kettlebells. And you've seen this in other sports too. People seem to view kettlebells as inherently more functional for grappling sports than a barbell or dumbbell, for example, and it's not true. There's so many problems with kettlebells. For one, most people I've ever seen use kettlebells are using them wrong. There is a lot of nuance to using them that people just don't know and aren't taught. They're harder to micro-load. For example, I can't add 2.5 pounds to my kettlebell without buying a whole new kettlebell, whereas the barbell I can slide, a little weight on. Typically, for most exercises, you're gonna be better off doing higher reps with a kettlebell. Just it's inherently how a kettlebell is, and that's not necessarily good for Jiu-Jitsu. Jiu-Jitsu, in a way, is a high rep exercise already. You don't need to be doing a ton of reps on top of that. I see the reason people use kettlebells. It feels similar to doing Jiu-Jitsu. You're huffing and puffing while throwing things around, but there's just so many better implements to use. And again, it's not inherently bad, and there is a place for kettlebells for training for Jiu-Jitsu. It's so overused. It cannot be the only implement that you lift with. And then I just kind of reference it. The other problem a lot of people have when they lift for Jiu-Jitsu is they try to simulate Jiu-Jitsu in the gym. So you see a lot of people doing CrossFit or CrossFit type workouts where, again, they're huffing and puffing. They're also lifting moderately heavy for high reps. The only way to recreate Jiu-Jitsu is to do Jiu-Jitsu. Trying to do more of what you're already doing in the gym is just a recipe for injury, and it's a recipe for failure and for spinning your wheels, really. Anyway, the other problem people fall into, and it's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, is using cookie cutter powerlifting programs they find online, or bodybuilding programs, like a bodybuilding split. And it's not necessarily bad, but a powerlifting program is assuming that you are doing powerlifting. And if you're doing Jiu-Jitsu, you should not be doing powerlifting at the same time. If you are, both are gonna suffer to some degree. And a lot of the progressions for powerlifting is also assuming you're not doing this insanely intense exercise on the side. So again, not the best to be doing. And then another one I think I see a lot of is a lack of goals and a lack of knowing how to progress in the gym, or not knowing. Anyway, I'm gonna ramble a bit during this, especially with goals. Like the same thing, people doing these CrossFit type workouts, like doing random stuff that feels like Jiu-Jitsu, and then doing the next time you go in the gym doing another workout that feels like Jiu-Jitsu, you're probably not progressing at all. You see it a lot. I mean, you see it with CrossFit in general. Even if you're doing the same workout twice, are you actually getting better, or are you getting better at cheating the workout? For example, let's say your workout is doing 100 burpees as fast as you can, and the first time it takes you 20 minutes, the next time it takes you 18 minutes. Were you jumping as high the second time you did it? Were you flopping more? Is that why you were faster, or did you actually get more fit? And if you're just doing these random workouts, it's really hard to tell what's actually happening, why you're getting better in the gym. And another thing I see is a refusal to modulate your gym training around Jiu-Jitsu. I'm going to talk about this later, but you're training to get strong at Jiu-Jitsu, not to be strong. So if you're really trying to push numbers in the gym willy-nilly, it's not going to have the intended effect. You're going to probably hurt yourself. You're not going to have as much carryover to Jiu-Jitsu as you think you're having. And you really need to be modulating it. If you had a crazy hard day in Jiu-Jitsu and you go to the gym 6 hours later, you need to back off a little bit. Your body can only handle so much, especially if you're not a professional athlete. If you have a job, if you have a wife, kids, whatever, you need to like manage your stress level, both physically, mentally, etc. And then the last thing I see people do a lot is having a huge emphasis on non-specific cardio. And truly the best way to get better cardio for jiu-jitsu is to jiu-jitsu. A lot of people say that, it's true. But, and that's not to say you shouldn't go on runs. I think having just general cardio is good, but a lot of people treat that as their main form of training. So instead of squatting, I'll run more. Trying to get infinitely better cardio, and the payoff is pretty minimal. It might help with your recovery to some extent, but you're not going to get as direct of a carryover, especially cardio, into jiu-jitsu as you're getting from the effort you're putting into running. And again, don't take anything I'm saying that as a black and white statement. There is nuance here, of course. A lot of it depends on your experience and goals, but those are the general mistakes I see most people making. So from there, now that we've got that out of the way, I can kind of talk about how you should be setting up your training. So the general overview I'm going to go over first. I often tell people when they're training for a sport is the first thing you should do in the gym is the opposite of your sport. So if your sport is running marathons, you should be lifting as heavy as possible in the gym, typically. Again, it's not a black and white rule, but it's a good rule of thumb to kind of follow. It's the same with jiu-jitsu. I think people get way too sport specific with it. Often I've posted videos doing some sport specific movements and people think that's all I'm doing. It's very minimal. So really the best way to set up your training is 60% of your time should be spent doing general strength training. So squatting, deadlifting, benching, etc., which I'll get into specific movements more so later, but just trying to get generally stronger. That should be 60% of your training as a jiu-jitsu athlete. 30% of your time should be spent fixing imbalances and prehabbing injuries. I know it's like a hot button subject, prehab, is it real, whatever. It is real in my opinion, as long as you're doing it properly. Doing just willy-nilly stuff thinking you're doing prehab, that's not prehab, that's just doing willy-nilly bullshit. But 30% of your time, like I said, should be spent fixing imbalances and prehab. And I'll go over all these in depth as we go on. And then only 10% of your training in the weight room should be what you call sports specific, which seems very low, but that's how it should be. You're trying to get stronger for jiu-jitsu, not just strong. And if you're just doing a bunch of sports specific stuff, you're probably not getting strong. Anyway, so we'll kind of break these down. So for general strength, typically these would be higher weight, lower rep exercises. Similar, I guess, how powerlifters do it. For a lot of my clients who train jiu-jitsu, will often work up to a heavy single, double, triple, and sometimes do some back off sets. So for example, let's say we're squatting, we'll do a couple sets of 5, ramping up each set, a couple sets of 3, ramping up each set, and then some 3 singles, for example. And a lot of this will depend on the day, the goals, the phase of the training. But we're not doing a ton of volume necessarily, but we are going pretty heavy. Some of my clients I have hitting a daily 1 rep max, essentially, based off RPE. So not true 1 rep max, there's a big difference. And the way you progress in these, it's going to depend, which we'll talk about later again. But typically, for example, let's say you work up to a heavy double 1 week and you hit 200 pounds, whatever lift. Next week, if you're feeling good and you have the same RPE of fatigue after jiu-jitsu, which I'll talk about, you can go for a little bit more weight, same amount of reps, for example, or you can try and add a rep. There's many ways to progress, which I'll talk about later, and there's no right or wrong way necessarily. Typically, I favor adding weight, followed by adding reps, followed by adding sets for jiu-jitsu. So some movements you should be focusing on. First one, squatting. There are many ways to squat. I typically will pick joint-friendly variations because jiu-jitsu is inherently not joint-friendly. It's the worst thing for your joints, pretty much. So often I'll start people with box squats. We'll start with a relatively higher box and we'll lower it over time as their mobility and strength and control improves. And often using a safety squat bar, simply because it's going to work your upper back a ton and strengthen it for both injury prevention, and it's going to have a lot of carryover to other lifts think the safety squat bar is one of the best implements you can possibly use for Jiu-Jitsu. If you don't have one, a straight bar is completely fine. Don't worry about that. And then we want to work after squatting a hinge pattern. So often with Jiu-Jitsu people use a trap bar deadlift instead of a straight bar, simply because there's a little bit less shearing force in the spine. There's so many shearing forces already happening when you're doing Jiu-Jitsu. You don't need to be adding to it. It's not to say we never use a straight bar, but certainly we limit the use of the straight bar deadlift. And another big one that's very common is back extensions. Pretty much everyone I train who does Jiu-Jitsu, most who don't do Jiu-Jitsu also are doing back extensions. I prefer using a barbell instead of holding the weight in your chest, because as you come up, the weight comes closer to your hips, so it's going to put more of the force into your glutes and hamstrings and not your lower back. Because again, our lower backs are probably like semi-fucked if you do Jiu-Jitsu a lot in your lower back already. You don't need to be taxing it even more and more and more. And it's still going to work your lower back still, but trying to keep it more in the hips is important. Also, you can just hold a dumbbell there. If you don't have a barbell, you can do a back extension with holding a barbell in your hands instead of, again, at your chest. And then we do some pressing variation. And here, often it's horizontal. Starting out, I do have people doing a lot of vertical pressing, so overhead pressing, to make their shoulders more robust and healthy. But typically a horizontal press is going to have more direct carryover Jiu-Jitsu. It's pretty rare you're pushing someone or something up that way. As we said, you shouldn't press that way, but we do spend a little more time focusing on the horizontal press. Plus everyone wants a bigger chest, and it's going to do more for that. But I'll often pick shoulder-friendly variations. So that could be a multi-grip barbell, using dumbbells. Again, it's not to say we don't use a straight bar. I have 2 clients currently using the straight bar. 3 who do Jiu-Jitsu using the straight bar. But typically, I think it's good to focus, especially as you get stronger, honestly, to use more joint-friendly variations. Also done like bamboo bar, stuff like that. And then, again, overhead pressing, typically using barbell here. I think it's the best way to overhead press. I think it's superior to dumbbells. And it's easier to teach. It's easier to not compensate with other muscles. A lot of people with dumbbells, they start doing some weird leaning shit while they're doing it. But anyway, that's typically used as an accessory more so after the initial phase of just getting their shoulders stronger. And but then the real main focus for general strength, I think what's going to have the most direct carryover to Jiu-Jitsu is pulling strength. And here we'll typically pull a lot, again, horizontally, but we'll also do quite a bit of vertical pulling. And a pretty high percentage of these pulls are done against bands. I think it's just very useful. For one, assuming you're not you didn't start lifting and lifting's kind of new to you, it often teaches people to activate their lats better because you can't use momentum to finish the lift. You actually have to contract equally the whole way through as it gets heavier on the way down. And it's just gonna have more, again, a little bit more direct carryover. Only picking exercise for direct carryover is a bad idea, but you do want a little bit of that. So it's similar like finishing a choke. Typically just having this little stronger strength and everything is close to you is gonna pay off. And then for the next part, so again, that was about 60% of your time she's been doing all of that. And then next is fixing imbalances and prehab, and this is about 30% of your time. So big issues with Jiu-Jitsu, and it depends a little bit how you do Jiu-Jitsu, but really common things you see are hip flexor imbalances. It's one of the most common things. So working your hip flexors and strengthening them specifically, one might be stronger than the other, one might be tighter than the other. So part of that is going to be mobility, part of it's going to be strengthening. So like one of my favorite things is doing weighted leg raises in a Roman chair, whatever the fuck it's called. So you put your shoulders on here, lifting your legs up, and we'll often put a dumbbell between the legs. It's going to strengthen your abs and your hip flexors. Also going to work your adductors a little bit by squeezing, and it's going to teach them to work in conjunction with each other. Very useful. You do it all the time in Jiu-Jitsu, and it's a good way to like actually balance it all out. Sometimes one leg at a time, like lifting one leg up for the leg raises at a time can be good for fixing imbalances. Working a little hip flexor endurance as well, strength endurance, I should say. And then another big one is Bulgarian split squats. Everyone I train who does Jiu-Jitsu does Bulgarian split squats. We'll typically pause in the bottom often to work the glute medius a little more. We'll offset the load. So if your left leg's forward, we'll have the weight in the right hand, a dumbbell, for example. we'll often load up both hands too, it kind of depends, but pretty much always doing Bulgarian split squats to some extent. And there's variations of that too. If you want to work upper back a little more, if you want to get work a little more glute, less hamstring, for example, you could hold a goblet position. There's a bunch of stuff you can do, especially if you have mobility issues. It's a good way to do it because it's going to keep you more upright. But again, this isn't a precise program. Just some general tips. Shoulder mobility is often a little fucked if you do jiu-jitsu to some extent. So working strength through ranges of motions. A lot of people in the gym typically want to work. I posted a video a while ago. I've been doing shoulder raises with my arm kind of back here on a decline bench. And for one, you get a crazy pump, which is awesome. Even if you're a bodybuilder, it's good. But those are the positions your shoulders are getting hurt in. So if you're getting like Kimura, weird shit, omoplated, that's where your shoulders are going to get hurt. So if you build some strength in these positions that typically you wouldn't be using in the gym, extremely beneficial for reducing injuries, and also just like squeaking out of submissions too. Not that you shouldn't necessarily be doing that all the time. Another thing that I think it's important is more of a prehab thing than an imbalance, but is twisting and bending. Do you see a lot of jiu-jitsu, especially play half guard a lot, like deep half? You're gonna have some weird oblique issues, you're gonna have some weird QL issues, hip flexor issues. One side will be weaker than the other, one side will be stronger. So trying to fix those. So purposely twisting and bending in the gym is a good idea to some extent. I won't spend a ton of time on it because you're probably doing a lot already in jiu-jitsu. But I think machines are great to use here. If you have like an ab twisting machine, a lot of gyms have those if you go to like a normal gym. Doing side bends where you're actually twisting or bending your spine to the side are very useful. It's going to work your obliques and QLs as well. Things like that. It's just the landmine, see people do those. Not my favorite. It's a little weird on the shoulders for some people, but not a bad idea to be doing a little bit of that. And that's borderline sport specific, but often it's going to fix imbalances that people have, especially in mobility. A lot of people, they can twist real far one way and not the other because they're always twisting one way in jiu-jitsu. Another common one is especially for injury, a lot of elbow injuries. I see a lot when people being compressed here, right? They're like, in side control and they're trying to defend it. So one of my favorite things, honestly, is doing JM press. And this is something you shouldn't be doing right away. If you're new to lifting, it's pretty rough on the elbows if you're new to lifting. And if you have small arms especially, it's rough on the, or small biceps, I really should say. It's a little rough on the elbow. But if you've been lifting for a little bit, I think it's one of the best things to do for jiu-jitsu. JM press, everyone kind of tells how to do it differently, but my version, and I think was the best version, holding the barbell close grip, thumbless, and you have it low in your palm. You basically bring it to your neck. It's kind of a mix of a close grip and a skull crusher. So this is kind of the motion laying your back. Look it up, fucking Google it, look up J.M. Blakely describing it. It's probably the best way. It's named after him. Very good for injury prevention and just strengthen that position. If you're here a lot framing, if you're stronger pushing off from that, it's going to be great. And then there's more prehab is doing really high rep band work. If you look at Westside and Louis, I'm not saying you should train like Louis Simmons, rip, or Westside, but doing really high rep band work can be very useful, especially for elbows and biceps, which are pretty common nagging injuries for jiu-jitsu, just to get blood flow. So doing like a couple sets of 100 with the thinnest band you can find, push downs or curls, things like that. Even rows can be multi-joint. I think I mentioned earlier, working your adductors and QLs is often an issue, especially imbalance. One adductor might be real strong, other one might be weak and tight. So again, I think using machines for those are great if you have an adductor machine at your gym. And QLs, I like side bends for those. It's a sort of side bend variation I like to do, where you hold weight in one arm. So for example, my right arm, and you bend sideways, and you're actually like you're crunching into the weight. So you're using the weight as feedback to push farther into the weight, and to go lift this hand up to open the ribs a little bit to get a little farther bend. Holding it there for a couple seconds, coming back up to a neutral position. And it will work your obliques as well. And then I think sled work's very useful as well. Backwards sled drags, forward sled drags, like marches I should say. Going slow, knees over toes guy loves it. He talks about it a lot, it's very popular. Westside kind of popularized that one too. But just for kind of non-specific prehab, especially for the knees, very, very useful. Calf raises as well. It's good for knee health. It's not going to do a lot to grow your calves, to be honest, but if you have stronger calves, it's going to make your knees feel a lot better. So calf work, tibialis anterior, shin, doing stuff like that. They make tib bars. You can rig them up pretty easy. One thing kettlebells are actually really good for is doing tibia raises. You just put your foot through the handle and push your heel into the bell of it while you're laying down or sitting. And then we finally get to the sport specific, and again, this only makes up 10% of your workout, but this can be many things. It could be doing specific drills, so like takedown drills, stuff like that. Working on isometric strength, I would qualify as sport specific. So for example, you'll pull up and just hold yourself there. You could be squeezing a ball. Often you need special implements for a lot of this, but not always. And then working on your neck, I think it's very important. It's probably the most important sport-specific thing you can do for Jiu-Jitsu is strengthen your neck and getting better neck mobility. So it can be yeses, nos, some sideways stuff, resisting in many directions, some twists if you have special implements for it. But you should be doing some sort of neck work aside from Jiu-Jitsu. And with that one especially, like if you're getting cranked on a ton on your neck in your Jiu-Jitsu practice, maybe don't go super hard during your neck work because you probably got a lot of stimulus already. And then grip work, which is probably the second most important sport-specific thing you can do. There's many ways to do this. I have like the jumbo fat grips I use, which has a lot of care of no-gi because it's like wrapping someone's wrist or ankle. Holding onto towels for stuff, and for example, doing a tricep push down, just holding onto a towel with your fingers is going to seem like gi grips to some extent. Doesn't need to be super specific with grips, in my opinion. I think working a variety of different types of grips is the best way to train your grip. But again, typically need some sort of implement. It could be as simple as a towel though. And then how to actually know how hard to go in the gym. This is the hardest part, and a lot of this can be being honest with yourself. I like to rate my Jiu-Jitsu practices on an RPE scale, rated perceived exertion, on a scale from 1 to 10 essentially. I mean, everything after 5 or under 5 is kind of useless, but I kind of rate it the same. So if I'm dead in a pool of sweat at the end of practice and I can barely stand up, I'd say that's a 10. And you can go down from there. Competition's a 10, stuff like that. And then I use for myself, and I think it's useful, I call it doesn't have a name, the convex RPE 17 scale, which sounds stupid as fuck, and it kind of is. But basically, if I do a 10 RPE Jiu-Jitsu class, I will purposely limit the overall difficulty of my gym workout to 7. So the total is always going to be 17. If I do like an RPE 9 Jiu-Jitsu practice, then I will limit my gym time to an 8 RPE as a whole. Individual lifts might be above that, some might be below, but as a whole, try to limit to 8. So if you have an 8 practice, 9 in the gym, 7 practice, 10 in the gym, you can go harder. And it's a little arbitrary, but it's kind of how lifting is, especially for a sport. So that's what I like to use. So it's a way to self-limit myself, and especially as someone who started in the gym, went to Jiu-Jitsu, it's really hard for me to back off in the gym often, but this gives me a kind of more concrete way to do it. And then finally, and this is one of the things I talk about when most people mess up when they're setting up Jiu-Jitsu training, is you need to set goals in the gym. And these goals need to be tied to Jiu-Jitsu. They should not be arbitrary. Don't just pick random numbers. So, and a big part of this is also the risk versus reward. So with your goals, I think, is a 700-pound deadlift better than a 450-pound deadlift for Jiu-Jitsu? Probably not. Is the risk from going to a 450 to a 700-pound deadlift worth it for Jiu-Jitsu? Probably not. So there's this risk versus reward factor you need to put into every lift you're doing and every workout you're doing, really. And you have to remember that you're training to be strong at Jiu-Jitsu, not just strong, which I mentioned earlier. Having a 700-pound deadlift is fucking awesome, but if that doesn't translate over to Jiu-Jitsu, it's obviously not what you need. And a lot of that comes down to wants versus needs. If you want to look shredded and awesome, maybe you should back off in Jiu-Jitsu for a little bit and spend a little more time in the gym. If you want to get really good Jiu-Jitsu and you're just trying to, complement your Jiu-Jitsu with lifting, back off the gym a little bit. You're trying to improve your Jiu-Jitsu in the long run. So, but that said, I think some basic goals that every guy at least can make, and women can probably reduce these a little bit, but a lot of women can hit these too. These aren't crazy numbers, and this is kind of where you reach a point where you're having a lot of carryover from the gym, from your lifts to your sport, and this kind of goes for literally any sport. But I think some good goals are 2 times body weight back squat. Again, if you're really little, it's probably easier to get to, but again, it's general. I think having a 2.5 pound body weight deadlift. So again, if you weigh 100 pounds, trying to deadlift 250. Could be the trap bar. Again, if you use a trap bar, try to use the low handles. Everyone fucking defaults to the high handles. Don't do that. Stop that. A one times body weight bench. I think it's pretty good for jiu-jitsu. Assuming you're not rolling against dudes 5 times your size. If you can push your own body weight off you, you can probably push someone off you. Not that that's how you should be escaping stuff, but you know what I mean. And then for pull-up, for example, doing your body weight plus 30% of your body weight. Added to your pull-up weighted. And they're pretty simple goals. Again, they're not super hard to attain. Don't rush to attain these because, again, there's a risk versus reward. If you're rushing and really pushing the gym, you're probably gonna lead to injury. So you should take a little time, especially if you're new to lifting. Don't be rushing things. Anyway, so if you guys leave comments, I'll try to answer things the best I can. Again, this is all very general. I do have a 2-day program. If you guys want, I can put together a more in-depth program and discuss, sets and reps schemes I like to use, more specifics on the lifts that I like to use. But that's that. This is a little bit of rambling. It's almost a half hour of talking, I think, to myself in a dungeon. But I hope you guys glean something from this. And again, if you have any questions, just leave a comment, and I'll try to answer. Thanks, guys.